The moon has been a faithful companion to planet Earth for billions of years. While the Earth exerts a gravitational force on the moon due to its size, the moon also has effects on the Earth. Now NASA officials are warning of a global catastrophe that will be caused by an event happening to the moon: massive flooding. What is going on the moon? How will this cause unprecedented flooding on the Earth? And how will it affect you? In this video, we dive into NASA officials' warning of the catastrophic flooding that the moon will cause on planet Earth. The Earth is gifted with a faithful companion that follows it on its journey around the sun. This is the moon, the source of some of the illumination in the night sky. For many reasons, the moon is special to us. It is the closest celestial object to us and the only one that has been visited by humans. The moon has been close to the Earth for billions of years, but there are different theories as to how it was formed. The foremost theory is that an object roughly the size of Mars collided with Earth about 4.5 billion years ago. The resulting debris from both Earth and the impactor then accreted to form the moon, which was initially in a molten state. However, within about 100 million years, most of the global magma ocean crystallized, with less dense rocks floating upward and forming the lunar crust. With a radius of about 1,080 miles or 1,740 kilometers, the moon is less than a third of the Earth in width. In other words, if the Earth were the size of a nickel, the moon would be about as big as a coffee bean. The moon sits an average of 238,855 miles or 384,400 kilometers away, enough room to fit 30 Earth-sized planets. One cool but unknown fact about the moon is that it's moving away from the Earth. However, there is no need to fear we are losing our only satellite, as it's moving away at a speed of 1 inch per year, so you will gaze up at the night sky in your old age and still see the moon there. Meanwhile, most moons of other planets have individual names, unlike the Earth's moon. This is because until Galileo Galilei discovered the 4 moons of Jupiter in 1610, nobody had any idea that other planets had moons too. Also, the same side of the moon is always facing the Earth, even though both are rotating. This is because the moon rotates at the same rate that it revolves around Earth. Scientists call this synchronous rotation. As such, the moon has a dark side, which is the far side of the hemisphere we never see from Earth. However, the term is misleading, since as the moon orbits Earth, different parts get sunlight or darkness at different times. In fact, when people talk about the phases of the moon, this is the cause. While it takes the Earth about 365 days to go around the sun, the moon makes a complete orbit around Earth in 27 Earth days and rotates or spins in that same amount of time. But because Earth moves while also rotating, it appears to us that the moon orbits the Earth every 29 days. If anything, nothing is ever as they seem. What is the moon made of? It has a core, mantle, and crust. However, compared to other terrestrial bodies, the moon's core is small. This solid core, rich in iron, is only 149 miles or 240 kilometers in radius. It is surrounded by a liquid iron shell that is 56 miles or 90 kilometers thick. There is a partially molten layer with a thickness of 93 miles or 150 kilometers, blanketing the iron core. The moon's mantle extends from the top of the partially molten layer to the bottom of the crust. This mantle likely contains minerals like olivine and pyroxene, which are made up of magnesium, iron, silicon, and oxygen atoms. The crust has a thickness of about 43 miles or 70 kilometers on the moon's near-side hemisphere and 93 miles or 150 kilometers on the far side. It is made of oxygen, silicon, magnesium, iron, calcium, and aluminium, with small amounts of titanium, uranium, thorium, potassium, and hydrogen. The moon may appear calm, but long ago it had active volcanoes. They're all dormant today and have not erupted for millions of years. What does the surface of the moon look like? Thanks to probes and missions, we know what the moon's topography looks like and why it is that particular way. Unlike the Earth, the moon's atmosphere is too sparse and it cannot prevent objects from hitting it, so the moon is subjected to a steady barrage of asteroids, meteoroids, and comets. The collisions leave numerous craters behind. For example, the Tycho crater is more than 52 miles or 85 kilometers wide. Over billions of years, these impacts have pummeled the surface of the moon into fragments ranging from huge boulders to powder. Nearly the entire moon is covered by a rubble pile of charcoal gray, powdery dust and rocky debris called lunar regolith. Regolith is actually the nightmare of moon astronauts as it's charged and gets into everything, fouling them up. Beneath it is a region of fractured bedrock referred to as the megaregolith. Scientists call the light areas of the moon the highlands. The dark features, known as Maria, are basins formed from the numerous impacts, and they were filled with lava between 4.2 and 1.2 billion years ago. These light and dark areas are rocks of different compositions and ages, and researchers use them to determine how the early crust may have crystallized from a lunar magma ocean. Today you will find man-made objects on the moon. These contain pieces of equipment, American flags, and even a camera left behind by astronauts. And if you have seen footage of astronauts walking on the moon, you might have wondered why they appear to bounce. Well, that will happen to you when you're in a place with less gravity than the Earth. Gravity on the moon is only about 1/6 of the Earth. How about surviving on the moon? Even with the most sophisticated apparatuses, you will have to be very hardy to remain long-term on the satellite. The temperature on the moon reaches about 260 degrees Fahrenheit or 127 degrees Celsius when in full sun. Remember, the atmosphere can't protect you from the sun's harshness. On the other extreme, when it gets dark, temperatures can drop to about minus 280 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 173 degrees Celsius. And when you need a glass of water on the moon, you may have to pass through multiple hoops. While it is true that there is water on the moon, it doesn't exist in the form that you can readily gulp. Interestingly, the discovery of water on the moon is quite recent, meaning a few decades ago you could have expired from thirst without knowing there was water nearby. The first conclusive discovery of water on the moon was made in 2008 by the Indian mission Chandrayaan-1. It detected the presence of hydroxyl molecules across the lunar surface, but they are concentrated at the poles. Other missions such as Lunar Prospector, L-Cross, and Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter have shown that the surface of the moon has global hydration. In total, 12 people have walked on the moon, all NASA astronauts. And while the moon is small compared to the Earth and trapped by Earth's gravity, the moon has powerful effects on the planet, and one of these effects is what NASA is warning will cause global flooding. Many things happening around you are due to the moon, even if you don't know it. In fact, if the moon were to vanish from its position, the Earth would instantly change so radically that we might not recognize our planet home. Animals will miss the moon so dearly. Take, for example, the crustaceans so low in the food chain. These creatures that are always moving depend on the moon to navigate. Even the smallest miscalculation is disastrous, as it would see them dried out on the beach, eaten by predators, or swept out to sea. You might have seen the mass spawning of corals on the Great Barrier Reef. Surprise, surprise, it is triggered by the moon. The corals time their spawning according to several factors, including temperature, salinity, and availability of food, but it always occurs between October and December and right after a full moon. On land, the dung beetle in Africa uses the polarization pattern of moonlight and the way it scatters through the atmosphere to navigate in a straight line. Without the moon, they will only move around in circles and be unable to get home. The most common and observable effect of the moon on the Earth is the tides. You get tides as the moon and the sun tug on the Earth. Actually, the Earth's oceans facing the moon bulge up in response to the lunar gravitational force, and as you might have guessed, forms a high tide. But what that means is that due to the difference in gravitational attraction on the near and far sides of the Earth, at the same time, there is also a high tide on the side furthest from the moon. And since the ocean is liquid, between these two high tides, there are two low tides. As the Earth rotates, these high and low tides move across the globe every 24 hours. So each coastal location will experience two high tides and two low tides every day. And tides are very important to marine life. There is an area known as the intertidal zone where many species thrive. And if this area becomes smaller or narrower due to weaker tides, the animals there will simply die off. And for humans, it means longer and harder fishing times. A popular water sport will also suffer, and you guessed right, surfing will suffer if anything happens to the moon. Incoming tides push more water to the beach, forming bigger waves. All of these things may sound too far out, but as NASA scientists in conjunction with a team from the University of Hawaii have discovered, we are about to witness the disturbing effects of the moon in real time. And this is thanks to the moon shifting its position. They call it the moon wobble. What exactly is going on with the moon? It turns out the moon is more mysterious than we thought. The crafty satellite has ways of surprising us. While the moon appears to move in circles and ovals, there is another factor in its rotation and revolutions, and that is what is going to cause trouble for us big time. We are already seeing the effects of climate change as the ocean and sea levels keep rising. However, it's about to get even worse for coastal towns. Of course, scientists have known about the moon's wobble for centuries, but the possible effects are just staring us in the face. NASA is particularly concerned about how the effect of the moon wobble would exacerbate the climatic problems the Earth is already facing. As we said earlier, high tides are caused by the pull of the moon's gravity on the Earth as the planet spins, making two tides appear every day. The moon also goes around the Earth approximately once a month in an orbit that is a little bit tilted. If we want to be more accurate, the moon's orbital plane around the Earth is at about a 5-degree incline to the Earth's orbital plane around the Sun. Due to this, the moon's orbit seems to fluctuate over time. It completes a full cycle or nodal cycle every 18.6 years. This notably happens on a slow scale. However, at definite points along the cycle, the moon's gravitational pull occurs from such an angle that it drags one of the day's two high tides a little bit higher, while the second one comes a little bit lower. By now, you should have noted that the moon is not necessarily wobbling itself. Also, the moon is still pulling on the Earth with the usual force. Of course, even before the effect of the moon's wobble was known, scientists were expecting significantly more high tide flooding. But in getting their predictions of these tides, the researchers have to work through lots of noisy data, as they have to deal with complex weather patterns, astronomical events, and regional tidal variation. The moon wobble is now part of the data they have to plug in for their simulations. NASA scientists say moon wobble will enhance the effective sea level. They are saying every coast in the US is at risk of dramatically increased floods as we move deeper into this decade. However, we might get a moment of respite while the moon is yet to get into its tide-amplifying cycle. The higher seas, which are amplified by the lunar cycle, will cause a leap in flood numbers on almost all US mainland coastlines and even Hawaii and Guam. Only far northern coastlines, including Alaska's, will be spared for some time because the land areas are rising due to long-term geological processes. So just how serious will the flooding be? You might be able to recollect some devastating floods of recent times, but NASA says the moon wobbling will cause the number of flooding incidents to triple or quadruple. That is a scary future. Using 2019 as a baseline where scientists predicted 600 floods, it is hard to quantify the effects of the increased flooding NASA is expecting. Low-lying areas are the most at risk due to the increase in flooding, but it will only get worse in time. Using models, researchers have been able to describe how these floods will look, and some of these floods could happen in clusters, meaning they may last more than a month. Depending on the positioning of the moon, sun, and Earth, cities may experience a flood on consecutive days or every other day. The researchers discovered these tipping points by observing 89 tide gauge locations in every coastal US state and territory, excluding Alaska. They created a new statistical framework that mapped commonly used sea level rise scenarios and flooding thresholds, the number of times those thresholds have been exceeded annually, astronomical cycles, and statistical representations of other processes, such as El Niño events that are known to affect tides. Based on all of this, they produce projections into the 2080s. They are continuing the study, so they plan to update the flood tool in the future. Having such frequent flooding can result in heavy economic damage. Imagine a city getting flooded 10 or 15 times a month. Businesses can't continue operating when their car parks are under feet of water. People will lose their jobs because they can't get to work. There will be health crises due to the seeping cesspools of water. This is before accounting for damages to critical infrastructure like water supplies, power generation, communication equipment, and more. Farmers too may lose all their crops and animals when they are submerged underwater, which will lead to food insecurity. All told, the US alone could be looking at trillions of dollars in damages. These floods are different from ordinary high-tide floods that may reach about 2 feet in depth and are called nuisance floods because they are more of a nuisance than outright calamity. NASA hopes the release of its findings will help at-risk cities take measures to prevent too much damage. It is important that they start preparing now, as the flooding can last a decade once they start. Rising sea levels have already made living on the coast risky. Some experts say it may have played a role in the catastrophic collapse of a condo building in Surfside, Florida. However, the effects of the moon wobble will be felt all over the world. In the UK, for instance, low-lying areas in Scotland with rivers and coasts nearby are among those often prone to flooding, and recent outlooks by climate awareness organisation Climate Central say that many coastal areas of the UK, including parts of Falkirk, Fife and Glasgow, as well as English areas like Grimsby, Hull and Southport, could be below water level by 2050. Scientists are expecting the moon wobbling to amplify flooding in these places. Let's hear your thoughts on NASA's warning of flooding in the comments section below.